The man's voice cracked the silence of Seoul National University Hospital at 3:47 in the morning like a gunshot through glass. He was on his knees. His white dress shirt was soaked with blood that was not his own, the metallic smell of it filling his nostrils, mixing with the antiseptic burn of hospital air until every breath tasted like rust and bleach and terror. His hands were leaving red smears across the tile floor as he clawed his way toward the emergency room doors. 2 security guards had him by the arms. He fought them like a wounded animal, thrashing, snarling, his $1,000 designer shoes scraping against the floor as he dragged himself forward inch by desperate inch. That is my woman in there. If she dies, if you let her die, I will burn this city to the ground. Do you hear me? I will burn it all. A nurse behind the reception desk dropped her clipboard. The metal clang echoed through the corridor. Her hand flew to her mouth. She recognized him. Every person in South Korea would have recognized him. The sharp jaw. The dark, wild eyes. The face that had graced the cover of Forbes Asia and haunted the dreams of half the women in the country. That's Choi Seo-jin, she whispered. Choi Seo-jin. CEO of the Choi Empire. Net worth, $14 billion. A man who had never in his 32 years of life raised his voice in public, never lost control, never shown a single crack in the mask of ice he wore like armor. That man was now on the floor of a public hospital, his billion-dollar hands slippery with someone else's blood, crying so violently that his whole body convulsed. He wasn't begging the security guards. He wasn't begging the doctors. He was begging God, or fate, or whatever force controlled whether the woman behind those doors lived or died. And the woman behind those doors was nobody. A maid. A housekeeper. A Nigerian immigrant who had come to South Korea with nothing but a suitcase and a prayer. A woman who cleaned floors for a living. A woman who had once told him, with her chin raised and her eyes steady and not a single tremor in her voice, I am not dessert. He was willing to burn the world down for her. How did they get here? How did the coldest, cruelest, most untouchable man in Seoul end up crawling across a hospital floor for a woman the world said he should never have loved? It started 70 days ago, with a mop, a bucket, and the only woman on earth who never once bothered to look at Choi Seo-jin twice. But before I take you there, I need you to do something for me right now. Subscribe to this channel. Hit that notification bell. Because this story is going to wreck you. It's going to make you cry, it's going to make you scream, and it's going to make you believe in a kind of love so dangerous it nearly killed them both. Now let's go back to the beginning. 70 days earlier. The woman in his bed was crying. They always cried. It was the one predictable thing about Choi Seo-jin's love life, if you could call it that. They came willingly, eagerly, desperately. And they always left in tears. 11 days, she sobbed, sitting on the edge of his king-sized bed in the penthouse that occupied the entire 62nd floor of the most expensive building in Gangnam. She was beautiful. An actress. Her face was on 3 billboards within a mile of this building. You said we had something special. I never said that. Seo-jin was already dressed. Black suit. Cufflinks. Hair slicked back. He was checking his phone, scrolling through emails, giving her approximately the same amount of attention he'd give a weather notification. I don't use the word special. I don't use any words like that. You should know this by now. Then what was this? What were the last 11 days? He paused his scrolling. He looked at her, and his face held nothing. Not cruelty, not guilt, not sadness. Nothing at all. It was like looking into a window and seeing an empty room. Fun, he said. They were fun. And now the fun is over. Secretary Han left a gift on the table by the door. Cartier. You mentioned you liked the Panther collection. I don't want a bracelet. I want you. That's not on the table. She threw a pillow at him. He didn't flinch. She screamed. He waited. She gathered her things, mascara running, hands shaking, and stormed out. The door slammed so hard the windows trembled. The penthouse fell silent. Seo-jin loosened his tie. He walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at Seoul, 62 floors below, tiny and irrelevant. The city glittered like a circuit board, millions of lives humming beneath him, and he felt connected to none of them. His phone rang. Secretary Han. Sir, the new housekeeper starts tomorrow. Another one? Mrs. John resigned. She said she'd rather clean sewers than. I get the point. Who's the replacement? The agency sent someone this morning to set up. She'll begin full-time tomorrow. Fine. Old this time, Han. I mean it. I don't need another situation. Understood, sir. He hung up and stared at his reflection in the glass. Behind him, the bedroom was littered with the debris of another disposable encounter. Tangled sheets. A wine glass with lipstick on the rim. A pair of heels kicked under the nightstand. He would not clean it up. Someone else always cleaned up after Choi Seo-jin. That was the entire structure of his life. He made messes, and other people dealt with the aftermath. This was the rhythm. Women rotated through his bed like seasonal fashion. 1 week, sometimes 2, never longer. He didn't date. He didn't romance. He consumed. And when he was full, he discarded, cleanly, efficiently, without guilt, because guilt required a conscience and Choi Seo-jin had cut his out years ago. He was 32 years old. He had inherited the Choi Group at 25 after his father's stroke and had tripled its value in 7 years. He controlled construction, tech, entertainment, and real estate. Politicians attended his parties. Celebrities begged for his attention. He was, by every measurable standard, the most successful man of his generation. He was also, by every unmeasurable standard, completely empty. But that was about to change. The next evening, he came home to the smell of food. Not the sterile, plastic-wrapped meals his previous housekeepers left in the refrigerator with reheating instructions taped to the lid. Something alive. Something with depth and complexity, layers of spice and heat that filled the penthouse like warm hands cupping his face. The smell had texture. It had memory. It reminded him of something he couldn't name, something from before he learned to stop feeling. He followed it to the kitchen and stopped in the doorway. A woman stood at his stove. Her back was to him. She was stirring a pot with one hand and adjusting the flame with the other, moving with the quiet precision of someone who had spent a lifetime making the most of limited resources. She wore a plain white blouse tucked into black pants. Her hair was braided tight against her scalp in cornrows that gathered at the nape of her neck. Her skin was deep brown, rich and warm, and even under the cold LED kitchen lights, it seemed to carry its own glow, as if the warmth came from somewhere inside her that the fluorescence couldn't touch. She hadn't heard him come in. He watched her. Not with desire, not yet, but with the detached curiosity of a man who categorized people quickly and efficiently. Housekeeper. Young. Foreign. Not what he'd ordered. He cleared his throat. She turned. And something snagged in his chest like a fishhook catching flesh. Not a feeling. He didn't have feelings. More like a glitch, a skip in the record, a half-second interruption in the perfectly calibrated machinery of his indifference. She was not beautiful in the way he was accustomed to. She wore no makeup. Her features were strong rather than delicate. High cheekbones. A wide nose. Full lips. Dark eyes that held a calm so deep it was almost geological, like looking into a lake with no visible bottom. She looked at him with the polite blankness of a woman looking at a wall clock. Acknowledged. Noted. Unimportant. Good evening, sir. I'm Annabelle Okonkwo. The agency sent me this morning. I've cleaned the penthouse, organized the laundry, and prepared dinner. It's a tomato-based stew, Nigerian recipe, adjusted for a Korean palate. If you'd prefer something different, I can accommodate tomorrow. She said it all in one efficient breath, then turned back to the stove. He stood there. No double take. No stutter. No stolen glance at the most desired face in South Korea. She had looked at him like he was anyone, like he was nobody, and returned to her cooking as if he were a piece of furniture she had to navigate around. What kind of stew? He heard himself ask. She answered without turning. Tomatoes, Scotch bonnet peppers, onions, and spices I brought from home. Served over rice. I adjusted the heat level, but it still has some kick. She plated the food without flourish, set it on the dining table with water and a napkin, bowed slightly, and began collecting her things. I arrive at 7, leave by 9. Good night, sir. The door clicked shut. The penthouse was silent. And the silence felt different than before. Before her, the silence had been neutral, the natural state of an empty room. Now it felt like absence. Like the room was aware that someone had left. Seo-jin sat down and stared at the plate. He took a bite. The stew was extraordinary. The heat bloomed slowly, building in waves, complex and layered. But it wasn't just the flavor. It was the care. Every ingredient chosen deliberately, every spice balanced with intention. This wasn't just food. It was an act of pride. He ate every bite. He sat at the empty table for a long time afterward, the taste of Scotch bonnet still burning on his tongue, trying to understand why a bowl of stew from a stranger had made him feel more than any woman had in years. Over the next 2 weeks, Choi Seo-jin did something he had never done before. He paid attention. Not to Annabelle's body. Not to her face. To her absence. To the way she filled his penthouse with evidence of her presence, spotless floors, perfectly pressed shirts, meals that made his chest tight, and then vanished completely. She was a ghost who left warmth behind. She never lingered. She never started conversations. She called him sir with a tone calibrated to the exact frequency between respect and distance. When he walked through the room, she stepped aside the way you step aside for a passing car. Efficient. Impersonal. Already moving on. He tested her. Of course he did. Day 5. He came out of the shower in nothing but a towel slung low across his hips, water still sliding down his chest, his abs, the V-cut of his lower torso. He walked directly into the kitchen where she was slicing fruit and stood close enough that water dripped from his body onto the counter beside her cutting board. Good morning, he said, his voice a full octave lower than necessary. She did not look up. Good morning, sir. Your breakfast will be ready in 8 minutes. I pressed your navy suit. It's in the closet. Her knife never stuttered. Her eyes never moved. Day 8. He sat at the kitchen counter, shirtless, reading a newspaper, making sure every flex and shift of his muscles was visible. She walked past him 4 times carrying laundry. She did not look below his chin. Not once. Day 12. He stood directly in her path in the hallway. She was carrying a stack of folded towels. She stopped. She waited. He didn't move. Excuse me, sir, she said, the way you'd say it to a door that was slightly ajar. Annabelle, can I ask you something? Of course, sir. Do you find me attractive? She met his eyes. Full contact. And what he saw was not attraction, not nervousness, not the flutter he was used to seeing. It was patience. The kind of patience a teacher has for a student who keeps asking the wrong question. You are my employer. My opinions about your appearance have no relevance to my work. May I pass? He stepped aside. She walked past him, and he caught her scent. Shea butter and something warmer underneath, something that clung to the space she'd occupied like the heat left behind after a flame goes out. He stood in the hallway, jaw clenched, pulse elevated, feeling something he hadn't felt since childhood. Rejection. Not dramatic, tear-filled rejection. Something worse. The calm, indifferent non-rejection of a woman who hadn't even considered the question worth answering. Choi Seo-jin had never in his life been irrelevant to a woman. He had been desired, hated, feared, obsessed over. But never irrelevant. And the irrelevance was doing something to his brain that he could not control. But Annabelle was not as unmoved as she appeared. On day 6, when he'd walked past her shirtless and she'd caught his reflection in the kitchen window, the full width of his shoulders, the cut of his jaw, her hand had tightened on the knife so hard her knuckles ached. She had held her breath until he passed and then exhaled slowly through her nose, counting to 10 in Igbo the way her mother had taught her when she needed to steady herself. She was not blind. She was not dead. But Annabelle Okonkwo had not survived her father's death, poverty, immigration, loneliness, and 4 years of casual racism in a foreign country by being stupid. She knew what men like Seo-jin did to women like her. They consumed them. They used them up like fuel and moved on, leaving nothing behind but ash and expensive guilt gifts. She could not afford to be ash. Her mother was sick. Her sister needed tuition. Her brother needed textbooks. She was the pipeline that kept her entire family alive, and she would not let a beautiful face and a towel wrapped around narrow hips jeopardize everything she had built. So she buried it. She called him sir and did her job and went home every night to her tiny apartment in Itaewon and lay in the dark, telling herself the fluttering in her chest was anxiety, not attraction. She lied well. She had been lying to herself about a lot of things for a long time. On a Friday evening at the end of the second week, young Hannah arrived. Annabelle was in the living room polishing the coffee table when the elevator doors opened and a woman walked in who looked like she had been assembled by a team of designers. 6 feet tall. Razor cheekbones. A body that made the silk dress she wore look like it had been born on her skin. Hannah's eyes found Annabelle immediately. She looked her up and down with a single, devastating sweep. Who are you? Not curious. Demanding. The housekeeper. Annabelle. Housekeeper. Hannah's lip curled. Fine. Run my bath. Hot. Use the Aesop products. And press my dress, the white one in the bedroom closet. Annabelle set down her polishing cloth and stood. I work for Mr. Choi, Miss Young. My duties are assigned by him. If you'd like personal services, you're welcome to contact him directly. Hannah took 2 steps forward, her heels striking the marble like small detonations. Let me tell you something, sweetheart. I have been in Seo-jin's life for 2 years. I have outlasted every woman who thought she could hold his attention. And I will still be here long after you and your mop are gone. So when I tell you to do something, you do it. Or I make one phone call and your visa gets a very thorough review. Annabelle held Hannah's gaze without blinking. My visa is in order. My employment is legal. And my duties are limited to the household. Is there anything else? Hannah's hand shot out and knocked the polishing cloth off the table onto the floor. You missed a spot. Annabelle looked at the cloth. She bent down, picked it up, and placed it calmly back on the table. Then she picked up her bag. Good night, Miss Young. She walked out. In the elevator, her hands trembled. Not from fear. From the effort of not saying what she wanted to say, which involved several Igbo phrases her mother would have slapped her for knowing. When Seo-jin came home, Hannah was draped across his couch in lingerie, a glass of wine in her hand. Miss me, she purred. He barely looked at her. His eyes went to the kitchen. Empty. Annabelle was gone. Something in his chest tightened like a fist closing around his ribs. That night, Hannah stayed. They went through the motions. But Seo-jin was mechanical. Distant. His body was in the room but his mind was in a kitchen that smelled like spices and shea butter. Afterward, in the dark, Hannah whispered, You're thinking about someone else. Go to sleep, Hannah. But Hannah didn't sleep. She lay in the dark with her eyes wide open, and the fear she felt was not the fear of losing a man. It was the fear of losing a position. Because young Hannah's relationship with Choi Seo-jin was not just personal. It was strategic. And the person who depended on her maintaining it would not be pleased. The next morning, Seojin ended things with Hannah. Quick. Clinical. This is done. Don't come back. He changed the locks. He had building security remove her access. That evening, he found Annabelle in the laundry room, ironing his shirts. She was humming, that low melody in a language he didn't know, and the sound moved through the warm air like something alive. Annabelle. She startled, then recovered. Sir. Your dinner is on the table. I don't want dinner. I want to talk to you. She set the iron down. The laundry room was small. The air was thick with steam and the clean scent of pressed linen. He was standing in the doorway, filling it, his tie loosened, his sleeves rolled up. Mr. Choi, this is a boundary I need to maintain. Why? Because if I don't, I become every woman I've watched walk out of this penthouse in tears. And I promised myself that I would never cry over a man who wouldn't cry over me. He absorbed the words like blows. What if I told you that in 3 weeks, you have made me feel more than any woman has made me feel in 32 years? I would say you've known me for 3 weeks, and you've known yourself for 32 years, and the fact that you don't know the difference between obsession and love is exactly why I need to keep this boundary. Have dinner with me, he said. One dinner. Just 2 people sharing a meal. No. Why? Because I have seen your dinners, Mr. Choi. I know what comes after. And I am not dessert. The words hung in the air. She met his eyes, and the collision was chemical, heat and electricity and something that had no business existing between a billionaire and a maid in a laundry room. Good night, sir. She left. Seojin stood in the laundry room, his forehead pressed against the wall, breathing in the fading warmth of pressed shirts and shea butter, and for the first time in his adult life, his eyes were wet. The next morning, Annabelle found sunflowers on the kitchen counter. Not a bouquet from a florist. Individual stems, slightly imperfect, clearly chosen by hand. Beside them was a handwritten note on torn notebook paper. I heard you tell your sister on the phone that sunflowers remind you of your father. I went to 5 different markets this morning to find them. I'm sorry if this crosses a line. I just wanted you to have something that makes you smile. Annabelle read the note 3 times. She placed the sunflowers in a vase on the windowsill where they'd get light. Then she sat on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet and pressed the note against her chest, breathing deep, shaky breaths, the kind that come right before the dam breaks. Over the next 2 weeks, the notes kept coming. Hidden inside the cleaning supply cabinet. Tucked under the ironing board cover. Folded into the pocket of the apron she kept at the penthouse. I tried to make jollof rice last night. Set off the smoke alarm twice. I think you should teach me before I burn the building down. You hummed that song again today. I recorded it on my phone. I've played it 11 times. I'm not proud of this. Annabelle kept every single one. She read them at night in her small apartment, sitting on her narrow bed, and they made her feel seen in a way she hadn't felt since leaving home. Not seen as a novelty, not as a foreigner, not as the help. Seen as a person. And that was the most seductive thing Choi Seo-jin had ever done. Then, on a Sunday night, everything shifted. Annabelle had come back to the penthouse to retrieve a phone charger she'd forgotten. She let herself in with her key, expecting emptiness. Instead, she found Seo-jin on the living room floor, surrounded by papers. Documents. Financial reports scattered like debris from an explosion. His tie was off. His hair fell across his forehead. He had a glass of water in his hand, not whiskey, just water, and he was staring at a spreadsheet with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Defeat. He looked up when she entered. His eyes were red-rimmed from exhaustion. He looked, for the first time since she'd known him, like a human being instead of a machine. My uncle is trying to take the company, he said, as if they were already mid-conversation. Choi Dong-wook. He's been building a coalition on the board for months. He's calling a vote of no confidence next week. He has 6 members. He needs 8. He's going to get them. He said it without self-pity. Without drama. Like a man reading his own autopsy report. Annabelle should have grabbed her charger and left. Every survival instinct she had, every wall she'd built, every lesson she'd learned about protecting herself, told her to walk away. She went to the kitchen. She boiled water. She made 2 cups of tea. She brought them to the living room and sat on the floor across from him. He stared at the cup in her hands like she had performed a miracle. "You leave the Financial Times on the counter every morning," she said. "I read it over lunch. Your Q3 earnings were the strongest in the Choi Group's history. Your uncle's division lost 12%. If the board votes with logic instead of loyalty, you win." He set down his water. "You read the Financial Times?" "I have a business degree from Yonsei. Graduated top of my class. The scholarship covered tuition but not rent or food, so I started cleaning houses in my 2nd year. When the scholarship ended, the cleaning paid better than any position that would hire a foreign woman with no Korean connections." "You graduated top of your class at Yonsei and you're mopping my floors?" "I'm mopping your floors because my mother needs surgery and my sister needs tuition and the world does not owe me the job my degree deserves. It owes me nothing. I owe my family everything." Silence settled over them. Not uncomfortable. The kind of silence that happens when 2 people stop performing and start being real. "Show me the board documents," she said. They worked until 3 in the morning. She sat beside him on the floor, dissecting financial reports, identifying swing voters, finding holes in his uncle's strategy with the precision of a surgeon. She isolated 3 board members who were motivated not by loyalty to either side but by self-interest. She mapped their investment portfolios, cross-referenced them with the Choi Group's upcoming projects, and built a counter-offer framework that gave each of them exactly what they actually wanted. Seo-jin watched her work with the stunned expression of a man who had just discovered that the quiet person cleaning his house was smarter than half his executive team. "This is brilliant," he said. "This is basic corporate strategy. You'd see it too if you weren't running on 0 sleep and bruised pride." He almost smiled. Almost. At some point during those hours, their shoulders began touching. Neither moved away. At some point, his hand brushed hers when they reached for the same page, and the contact sent electricity up both their arms. Neither flinched. Neither acknowledged it. But neither moved apart. The distance between them had stopped being a wall and had become something thinner, more transparent, more dangerous. A window. And they were both looking through it. At 2:30, she yawned. "Stay," he said. "Guest room. It's raining and it's almost 3 in the morning and I will not let you take the subway alone at this hour." She looked at him. He looked at her. And something passed between them that required no words. An understanding. A truce. A mutual acknowledgement that they were both standing at the edge of something vast and terrifying and impossible to name. "Guest room," she said. "Guest room," he confirmed. They walked down the hallway together, not touching, the space between them electric. She stopped at the guest room door and placed her hand on the knob. Seo-jin. First time. His name in her mouth. He felt it in his bloodstream, his spine, the soles of his feet. It sounded different when she said it. It sounded like it finally meant something. "Yes? You're going to win the board vote." "How do you know?" She looked at him with those steady dark eyes. "Because I've never seen anyone fight for something the way you're fighting right now." She went inside. The door closed. Seo-jin pressed his palm flat against the wall beside her door, lowered his head, and stood there breathing for a long time. When he finally walked away, his hand left a warm print on the cold paint that faded slowly, like a ghost. He won the board vote 9-4. It wasn't close. After the vote, Choi Dong-wook cornered him in the hallway outside the boardroom. His uncle's face was the color of wet concrete, and his voice was a razor wrapped in silk. "Enjoy this, nephew. It's temporary. I know about your little obsession with the maid. The African girl. I know everything about her. Her immigration status. Her family's debts. Her mother's illness. And when I'm done, you'll wish you'd let me take the company, because what I'm going to take instead will hurt much, much more. Seo-jin grabbed his uncle by the collar and slammed him against the wall. It happened so fast that the two board members still in the hallway froze. Seo-jin's face was inches from Dongwook's, and what the older man saw in his nephew's eyes made his blood go cold. Not anger. Something below anger. Something primal and patient and absolutely certain. Mention her again, Seo-jin whispered, and his voice was the quietest, most terrifying thing Dongwook had ever heard, and I will dismantle you so completely that your own children won't recognize your name. Nod if you understand. Dongwook nodded. Seo-jin released him, straightened his own collar, and walked away. His hands were shaking. Not from rage. From the realization that he had just threatened to destroy a man over a woman he hadn't even kissed yet. He was in free fall. And he didn't want a parachute. That evening, he celebrated the board victory at the penthouse with Annabelle. She cooked. He tried to help. He burned the rice so badly that the smoke alarm went off twice and the pot had to be thrown away. Annabelle laughed at him, a real laugh, full and bright and startled out of her before she could catch it, and the sound hit him like a defibrillator, like the first gasp of air after nearly drowning. He stood in the haze of smoke holding a ruined pot and watching her laugh, and something massive shifted inside his chest, a tectonic plate of emotion he had spent decades holding in place finally giving way. They ate on the living room floor, cross-legged, plates balanced on their knees, talking about everything. Lagos. Seoul. Her father. His father. He never hugged me, Seo-jin said. He'd never told anyone this. Not Secretary Han. Not the therapist he'd seen once and never returned to. Nobody. Not once. When I was 8, I fell off a horse and broke my collarbone. I was screaming. Crying. He stood over me and said, "Choi men do not cry. If you cry, you are not a Choi." I stopped crying that day. I stopped a lot of things that day. Annabelle set down her plate. She looked at him, and what he saw in her eyes was not pity. Pity would have made him close up again. What he saw was recognition. The recognition of one person who had been forced to grow up too fast, seeing the same wound in another. My father was the opposite, she said softly. He cried at everything. Weddings, funerals, my sister's school plays, even television commercials if they had dogs in them. He said tears were proof that God gave us more love than our bodies could hold. Her voice thinned. When he died, I cried for 3 weeks straight. I couldn't eat. Couldn't sleep. Couldn't stop. And then I stopped. Not because I wanted to, but because my mother needed me to be the strong one. Someone had to hold the house together. Someone had to work. Someone had to stop feeling so everyone else could keep going. She paused. We are more similar than you think, Seo-jin. We both learned to stop feeling because someone needed us to be something other than human. The room was quiet. The city glowed outside the windows like a constellation that had fallen to earth. They sat on the floor, two broken people from opposite ends of the world, and the space between them hummed with something that was bigger than both of them. Seo-jin reached out and touched her hand. Just her hand. Just the tips of her fingers. It was the smallest touch in the world, and it detonated something nuclear in both of them. She felt it travel up her arm and settle behind her ribs, a warmth that was equal parts comfort and danger. Annabelle pulled away. Not fast. Slow. Reluctant. Like pulling a bandage off a wound that hadn't finished healing. I should go, she whispered. Annabelle. I should go. She stood, gathered her things, and walked to the door. She paused without turning around. For the record, she said, your father was wrong. About all of it. The door closed. Seo-jin sat on the floor, his hands still extended toward the space where hers had been, and something inside him that had been frozen for 24 years began, slowly and painfully, to thaw. Then the outside world closed in. It happened on a Wednesday evening. Annabelle was at a small grocery store near her apartment, buying plantains and palm oil. She was reaching for a can on the top shelf when a woman beside her stiffened, pulled out her phone, and held it up next to Annabelle's face, comparing her to something on the screen. "That's her," the woman said loudly to her friend. "The maid. The one from the photos." Annabelle's blood went cold. "Excuse me? There are photos of you entering Choi Seo-jin's building. They're all over the internet. Someone posted them 2 days ago." The woman's lip curled with something that went beyond contempt into the territory of open disgust. "Gold digger. You people come to our country and think you can just..." Annabelle set down her basket and walked out of the store. Behind her, the two women laughed. The sound followed her down the street like a blade between her shoulder blades. She walked 3 blocks before she stopped, pressed her back against a wall in an alley, and covered her mouth with both hands so that no one would hear the sound that was trying to rip itself from her chest. She didn't know about the photos. She didn't know that young Hannah had been leaking them for weeks, laying groundwork, building a narrative. She didn't know that her face was already being shared on Korean message boards with captions that made her physically sick when she finally saw them that night, scrolling through her phone in bed with shaking hands. She read the comments until her vision blurred, and then she turned off her phone and lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, feeling the specific loneliness of being hated by strangers for the crime of existing in the wrong skin in the wrong country. The next morning, she walked into the penthouse and went straight to work without a word. The humming was gone. The quiet steadiness that had defined her presence had been replaced by something brittle. "What's wrong?" Seo-jin asked. "Nothing, sir." "Annabelle. Nothing is wrong. Your breakfast is ready." He let it go. He shouldn't have. 3 days later, everything detonated. Annabelle arrived at the penthouse and found an envelope on the kitchen counter. Inside was a printed email chain, dozens of messages between Choi Dong-wook and the employment agency that had placed her. The emails were dated months back, long before she'd ever set foot in the penthouse. Her hands shook as she read. Dong-wook had contacted the agency. He had specifically requested a young, attractive black woman. He had paid double the placement fee. He had manufactured the vacancy. He had chosen Annabelle strategically, knowing that if his nephew became involved with a foreign maid, the scandal would be the weapon he needed to destroy him. Annabelle was not a maid who happened to work for Seo-jin. She was a chess piece placed on a board by a man she had never met. The envelope smelled of perfume. Sharp. Expensive. Suffocating. Young Hannah. The room tilted. Annabelle sat on the kitchen floor and pressed her hands against her eyes. The grocery store. The photos. The emails. The notes in her pocket. The night on the living room floor when he'd touched her hand and she'd felt something shift inside her like the first crack in a frozen river. Was any of it real? Or was she just a prop in a rich family's power struggle? When Seo-jin came home that evening, his dinner was on the table. His shirts were ironed. But Annabelle was standing by the door with her coat on, and on the counter was her resignation letter stacked on top of the printouts. "What is this?" he asked. "Read it." He read. She watched the blood drain from his face. She watched his hands begin to shake. "Annabelle, I didn't know. I swear on everything I am. Maybe you didn't. But it doesn't change what happened. I was placed here. Selected like merchandise. Positioned in your house as part of your uncle's plan. That doesn't make what I feel. How would you know?" Her voice rose. Not a shout. A crack. "How would you know the difference between real and manufactured? You have never had a real relationship in your life. You rotate women like seasonal inventory. The only reason I'm different is because I didn't fall into your bed on demand, and the novelty of that has tricked your brain into calling it love." Each word was a knife thrown with precision. Everyone hit its target. "Please don't go," he said. And his voice was small. The voice of an 8-year-old boy who'd been told crying made him less than human. "Goodbye, Mr. Choi." "Mr. Choi." Not Seojin. The wall was back up. She left. The door clicked shut. That soft, devastating click. Seojin stood in his kitchen and something inside him shattered. He hurled his phone at the wall. It exploded. He swept dinner off the table. He grabbed the vase of sunflowers and raised it over his head. He stopped. The sunflowers trembled in his shaking hands. He lowered the vase slowly, set it back on the sill, and sank to the floor among the broken plates. He sat in the destruction he'd created, surrounded by broken things, and felt the full weight of being the most broken thing in the room. Now, if your heart is pounding, I need you to do something. Hit that like button. Drop a comment and tell me, was Annabelle right to leave? Subscribe right now because this story is about to go to its darkest place, and you are not prepared. The next 3 weeks were the worst of Choi Seo-jin's life. He didn't eat. He barely slept. He made decisions that terrified his executives. Secretary Han found him at his desk at 4 a.m. 3 nights running. "I need surveillance footage from the lobby," Seo-jin said. 6 months. Every person. Every delivery. He dug. He investigated. And what he found was worse than the emails. Young Hannah had been on Choi Dong-wook's payroll for 2 years. Every time she'd cycled back into Seo-jin's life, it was orchestrated. Dong-wook paid Hannah to keep Seo-jin emotionally shallow, to ensure he never formed a real attachment. The revolving door of women wasn't just Seo-jin's nature. It was a system. Hannah kept him distracted. The uncle kept him vulnerable. And when Annabelle became something genuine, they both panicked. The leaked photos were Hannah's work. The envelope was Hannah's move. She wanted to destroy the relationship from the inside, make Annabelle leave on her own, so Hannah could slide back into position. It had worked perfectly. Seo-jin made 2 calls. The first was to the Seoul Central District Prosecutor's Office. 14 months of documented embezzlement by Choi Dong-wook. The second was to young Hannah. "I know everything. You were paid to keep me empty. You have 24 hours to leave Seoul. After that, every brand you've worked with receives evidence of your involvement in corporate espionage. 24 hours. He hung up. Then he needed to find Annabelle. She had disappeared. Changed her number. Moved out. No forwarding address. It took 11 days. He found her through her sister's Instagram, a photo tagged at a restaurant in Dongdaemun. He drove there at 10 on a Tuesday night, walked into the back kitchen of a restaurant that charged 6,000 won for a bowl of noodles, and found her washing dishes. Her hands were red and chapped. She was thinner. Dark circles under her eyes. She froze. Water ran over her motionless hands. "How did you find me?" "Your sister posted a photo. I'm going to kill her." "Annabelle, please. You can't be here. If my boss sees you, I'll lose this job. I need this job because I lost the last one because of you. Because of my uncle. Not me. The result is the same." Her voice cracked. "I am washing dishes in a noodle restaurant, Seo-jin. I tried to get another housekeeping job and the family recognized me from photos your ex leaked. They called me a gold-digging foreigner. My mother's surgery is in 6 weeks and I don't have enough money. I cannot deal with you right now." She turned back to the sink. Her shoulders shook. Seo-jin stood there watching this brilliant woman who had graduated top of her class at Yonsei scrub pots with raw hands, and the shame nearly swallowed him. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I'm here to tell you 3 things. 1. Hannah was working for my uncle. Paid to keep me distracted for 2 years. She sent you those emails. The whole thing was orchestrated." Annabelle's hands stilled. 2. My uncle's been arrested. Embezzlement charges. He's done. She turned slowly. 3. His voice fractured. I arranged through an independent medical charity to cover your mother's surgery. Anonymous. She'll never know my name. I didn't do this to buy you. I did it because your mother is sick and I can help, and I would do it whether you ever speak to me again or not. It's not conditional. It's me being a human being for maybe the first time in my life, and you're the reason I even know how. You had no right, she whispered. Probably not. I didn't ask for help. I know. I told you I don't want your money. If you walk away right now, your mother still gets the surgery. She stared at him. This impossible man in a $10,000 suit with tears running down his face. Why are you crying? Because I love you. And I know the sheets you changed and the women you watched leave and the gift bags you threw away. I know all of it. But I am standing in this kitchen, Annabelle. Not my penthouse. Not my boardroom. Your kitchen. Because wherever you are is where I want to be. And if that means standing next to dirty pots for the rest of my life, then hand me a sponge. A sound escaped her, half laugh, half sob. She pressed her wet hand against her mouth. You are insane. Completely. This will never work. Probably not. You will break my heart. I would rather break my own. She stood there trembling, every wall crumbling. Then she did the bravest thing she had ever done. She stepped forward and pressed her face against his chest. His arms came around her instantly, crushing her so tight the breath left both of them. He buried his face in her braids and she gripped his jacket with both fists, and they held each other in that noodle restaurant kitchen like two people who had been drowning separately and had finally found each other. The cook at the next station quietly turned away and pretended to chop onions. That night they went to her apartment. A single room. Narrow bed. Hot plate. A window onto a brick wall. He sat on her bed, which creaked under his weight, and saw the textbooks. The family photo. And on the windowsill, in a jam jar, a single wilting sunflower. She still had sunflowers. Even here. You kept them, he said, his voice thick. I always keep them. I just buy cheaper ones now. He pulled her onto the bed and kissed her. This was a detonation. Months of restraint exploded. His hands found her waist, her ribs, the curve of her neck. Her fingers raked through his hair. He kissed her jaw, her throat, the place behind her ear where her pulse hammered, and she arched into him with a sound that obliterated everything. Annabelle, he breathed against her skin. Don't talk. Just stay. He stayed. And in that tiny apartment, on that narrow bed, they found each other completely. Not as a CEO and a maid. As two people, flawed and frightened and full of scars, choosing each other because the alternative had become unlivable. Afterward, she traced a scar on his ribs. How did you get this? A deal went wrong 5 years ago. The other party used a knife. The business world in Seoul is not always boardrooms, Annabelle. My father built the Choi empire through channels that don't appear in annual reports. When I inherited the company, I inherited those channels too. What kind of channels? The kind I swore I'd never use. The kind I would use without hesitation to protect you. Does that scare you? He asked. It should. But I grew up in Lagos. I know what it looks like when a man has one foot in light and one in dark. I don't need you to be clean. I need you to be honest. Then honestly, there is nothing I would not do to keep you safe. If that makes me a monster, then I am a monster who loves you. She kissed his scar and pulled the blanket over them. My monster, she said softly, and he held her tighter. 2 weeks of peace followed. Annabelle moved into the penthouse as herself, not a housekeeper. Seo Jin hired a cleaning service and promoted Secretary Han. He told his mother. Choi Eun-hai hung up on him. Then Seo Jin held a press conference. He stood behind a podium, broadcast live on every network, and laid everything bare. The uncle's embezzlement. Hannah's espionage. The manufactured placement. Annabelle Okonkwo is the woman I love. She did not pursue me. She did not manipulate me. She did the most radical thing anyone has ever done in my presence. She ignored me. She treated me like a regular man, and in doing so, she forced me to become one. He gripped the podium. To anyone who has sent hateful messages to this woman, hear me clearly. She is not a scandal. She is the woman who looked past every wall I ever built and loved the broken things she found behind them. He paused. To Choi Dong-wook, arrest warrants are pending. To young Hannah, defamation charges have been filed. To anyone else who thinks they can weaponize the woman I love against me, try it. I have the resources, the lawyers, and the patience to pursue every single one of you. No further questions. The press conference broke the internet. The narrative flipped. But not everyone surrendered. Choi Dong-wook had been arrested, but his lawyers secured bail in 48 hours. Assets frozen. Reputation destroyed. Nothing left to lose. And a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous creature on earth. In a gray holding room, Dong-wook made a call on a burner phone. His voice was flat. His eyes were empty. The woman. My nephew's woman. I want her gone. Not scared. Not threatened. Gone. Make it permanent. The line went dead. 3 days later, at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday, the parking garage security camera captured 31 seconds of footage. Annabelle walking through the garage. Groceries. Humming that melody. The lullaby her mother used to sing. A black van. 2 men. Fast. She tried to run. One grabbed her arm. She fought. Kicked one so hard he doubled over. But the second was bigger. He lifted her off the ground. The grocery bag fell. Oranges rolled across concrete like scattered planets. The van door opened. She was pulled inside. Gone. 31 seconds. That's how long it takes to erase a person. Secretary Han burst into Seo Jin's office. Ash-faced. Phone shaking. Sir. You need to see this. Right now. Seo Jin watched the footage 3 times. On the third, he crushed the phone until the screen cracked into his palm. He didn't feel it. Then he went quiet. Perfectly, absolutely, terrifyingly quiet. His face emptied of everything human. What remained was something Secretary Han had heard rumors about but never witnessed. The other side of Choi Seo-jin. The side his father cultivated in dark rooms. The side that built an empire on more than business. Lock down the building. Call Commissioner Beck. Private line. The favor from 2019. Every officer in Seoul, 1 hour. Sir. Then call this number. He wrote 10 digits. Han's blood went cold looking at them. Tell them the dragon's son needs a meeting. Tonight. Sir, those people. I know exactly who they are. Make the call. Within an hour, he was on national television. No composure. No polish. A man on fire. Annabelle Okonkwo was taken. 10 billion won for information leading to her safe return. He looked into the camera and his voice dropped to a whisper more terrifying than any shout. To the men who took her. I have every name connected to this. Every driver. Every lookout. Those names have been released to people outside the legal system. You have 6 hours. Return her safely, this ends. Hurt her, and on my father's grave, it never ends. 41 hours. Police tracked the van. The other front applied pressure to every criminal network in the city until silence became more expensive than loyalty. Someone talked. Warehouse. Incheon. 3 guards. 1 van. Seo-jin arrived before the police. 4 men from his father's world. No uniforms. No badges. Black car, no plates. When he walked through the warehouse door, 2 guards dropped their weapons at the sight of his face. The face was not a CEO's. It was something older. Something that understood violence fluently, instinctively, without translation. The 3rd guard raised a gun. One of Seo-jin's men moved faster than sight. The gun clattered. The guard followed. Annabelle was in a back room. Tied to a chair. Lip split. Wrist bruised purple. But her eyes were blazing. Furious. She had been fighting since the moment they took her. She had also been working. The youngest guard, the nervous one who flinched every time she looked at him, she had spent hours talking to him in a low, steady voice. She had learned his name. She had learned about his daughter. She had asked him if his daughter would be proud of what he was doing. When Seo-jin's men burst through the door, that guard was standing 3 feet from Annabelle with the rope half untied. He had been about to let her go. "It took you 41 hours, she said, raw but steady. He dropped to his knees. His hands shook untying the remaining ropes. "I'm sorry. I'm here." When the ropes fell, she collapsed forward into him. He caught her and held her so tight his arms ached, face pressed into her hair. "Alive. Alive. Alive. Don't you ever," she said against his chest, "let anything happen to me again. Never. I swear." He carried her out. She said she could walk. He wouldn't put her down. He held her the entire ride to the hospital, and when she lost consciousness from dehydration, the blood from her split lip soaking into his shirt, that was how Choi Seo-jin ended up on the floor of Seoul National University Hospital at 3:47 in the morning, clawing toward emergency room doors, screaming her name, begging for her life. She survived. Of course she survived. Annabelle Okonkwo had survived poverty, immigration, racism, and a kidnapping. She would not be taken out by dehydration and a split lip. She woke in a private room filled with sunflowers. Seo-jin was asleep in the chair beside her bed, blood-stained shirt, his hand around hers even in sleep. She squeezed. He woke instantly. "Hi," she said. "Hi. Wrecked. Destroyed. How do you feel?" "Like I was kidnapped." He choked. "That's not funny." "It's a little funny." She studied his face. "Your uncle? Arrested. No bail. Kidnapping plus embezzlement. Done permanently. Those men you came with? People I never wanted to call. I'll never call them again. But I won't apologize for this time. I'm not asking you to apologize. I'm asking you to promise that whatever darkness you carry it in the light with me. No secrets. If I love the whole man, I need to see the whole man. Even the parts that scare you? Especially those." He pressed his forehead to hers. "No more masks. Not with you. Not ever." She kissed him softly, her split lip stinging. That night, after Seo-jin finally fell asleep in the hospital chair, Annabelle got up quietly. She walked to the bathroom. Closed the door. Locked it. And then Annabelle Okonkwo, who had been strong in front of kidnappers and billionaires and a country that kept telling her she didn't belong, sat down on the cold tile floor and fell completely apart. She cried the way she hadn't since her father's funeral. Ugly, heaving sobs muffled with both hands over her mouth. She cried for the girl who left Lagos alone at 22. For the woman scrubbing toilets with a Yonsei degree. For the bruises on her wrists and the fear she'd swallowed for 41 hours and the look on the young guard's face when she asked about his daughter. For her mother who was sick and her siblings who needed her and the fact that being strong all the time was so heavy, so impossibly, crushingly heavy, that sometimes she forgot what it felt like to put it down. 15 minutes. Then she washed her face. She looked at herself in the mirror. Swollen lip. Bloodshot eyes. The woman who had survived everything and was still standing. You are still standing, she whispered to her reflection. You are still standing. She went back to bed. Jean stirred, reached for her hand, found it, and settled. She lay in the dark holding the hand of the most powerful man in Seoul and let herself feel something she had been denying for months. Safe. For the first time in 4 years, she felt safe. Choi Eun-hye arrived at the hospital on the second day. Jean's mother walked in without announcement, impeccable, her face a controlled storm. She stood at the foot of Annabelle's bed. My son nearly destroyed this city looking for you. I know. He called people his father swore he would never call. I know. Silence. Then Eun-hye reached into her bag and pulled out a silk pouch. Inside was a jade bracelet, deep green, old, luminous with generations. This was my mother's. And her mother's before her. It is given to the woman who holds the heart of the eldest son. She held it out. I understand survival. And I understand what it takes to love a difficult man and choose to stay. Annabelle took it. The cool weight settled against her palm like an anchor. Thank you, Mrs. Choi. Eun-hye. Call me Eun-hye. In the doorway, Jean watched his mother place a family heirloom on the wrist of a Nigerian woman in a hospital bed, and something broken inside him since he was 8 years old quietly mended. 3 months later, Jean flew Annabelle's family to Seoul. Her mother Adiz arrived first, small, fierce, filling rooms the way fire fills a hearth. She walked into the penthouse and said, very clean. But where is the kitchen? You all look underfed. When she saw Annabelle, she held her daughter's face and wept silently. Then she turned to Jean. So. You are the one. Yes, ma'am. My daughter was kidnapped because of you. Yes, ma'am. And you got her back. I would have gotten her back from the bottom of the ocean. Adiz circled him. Took his hands. Examined his palms. Too skinny. Sad eyes. But honest hands. I can always tell. She pointed at the kitchen. You eat my food tonight. If you survive the pepper, we discuss my daughter. The pepper nearly killed him. 3 bowls. Vision blurred. Nose running. Sweat pouring. But Adiz was watching, and Annabelle was watching trying not to laugh, and he would have eaten lava before stopping. He has spirit, Adiz declared. Stupid, but spirit. Eun-hye arrived for dinner on the second night. She and Adiz stood in the kitchen like 2 generals. Your son is not what I expected, Adiz said. Your daughter is not what I expected either. What did you expect? Someone who would be intimidated by my world. And instead? Instead I got someone my world should be intimidated by. Adiz laughed, a huge sound that startled Eun-hye into laughing too. 2 mothers from opposite ends of the earth, and the sound of their laughter broke something open in the room that could never be closed. By midnight, Adiz was teaching Eun-hye to pound yam and Eun-hye was teaching Adiz to fold mandu, arguing about whose method was superior. Neither would concede. It was perfect. 6 months after the hospital. Saturday. Winter. Snow falling over Seoul. Jean took Annabelle to Namsan Tower at sunset. At the observation deck, snowflakes catching in her braids, the city below them like earthbound stars, he stopped walking. Annabelle. Yes? I've been carrying something in my pocket for 3 weeks, and if I don't do this now, Secretary Han is going to stage an intervention because he says I keep touching my jacket in meetings and the board thinks I'm developing a twitch. She laughed. That laugh. The one from the kitchen when he burned the rice. The one that cracked the ice on his heart. He reached into his pocket. Hands shaking. Fumbled the box. Swore. Got it open. Inside was a ring. Not a diamond. A yellow sapphire, deep and warm. The color of sunflowers. He dropped to one knee in the snow. I was the worst man in Seoul. I used people. I threw them away. And then you walked into my house with a mop and you didn't care about any of it. You cared about whether I microwaved fish properly, and that, Annabelle, that broke me. She was crying. He was crying. Snow falling. You broke me. And then you rebuilt me. And the man you rebuilt is on his knees asking you to let him spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of you. You told me once you would never cry over a man who wouldn't cry over you. Look at me. Look at my face. I am crying. I have been crying since the day you left. And I will never stop, because you taught me that tears are not weakness. They are proof that God gave us more love than our bodies can hold. Her father's words. Coming back to her through his mouth. She pressed both hands over her face and her shoulders shook. Annabelle Okonkwo, will you marry me? She dropped to her knees. She took his face in both hands. Yes. You impossible, infuriating, terrifying, beautiful man. Yes. He slid the ring on. The yellow sapphire caught the last light and blazed like a small sun. They knelt together in the snow, holding each other, crying and laughing, while the city glittered below like a promise kept. The wedding was in 2 places. Seoul first. Choi Estate Gardens. Cherry blossoms. 300 guests. Secretary Han in the front row, weeping before the music started. Seo Jin in a navy hanbok. Annabelle in a gown of white Korean silk with gold ankara woven into the bodice, designed by a Korean-Nigerian designer from a small atelier in Hongdae who cried when they described what they wanted. When Annabelle appeared at the aisle, Seo Jin stopped breathing. Secretary Han elbowed him. She walked toward him and tears ran down his face without shame, without apology, because the boy who was told not to cry was gone and the man who remained was not afraid to feel. Then Lagos. The street where she grew up. 300 became 3,000. Afrobeats and K-pop. Jollof beside bibimbap. Suya beside bulgogi. Seo Jin danced. Catastrophically. Moves that defied rhythm and physics. Annabelle's cousins formed a circle, cheering. He gave everything. Every uncoordinated limb. Every offbeat clap. Every surrender of dignity. Happiest he had ever been in his life. At midnight, they sat on the front steps of her mother's house. Their mothers arguing about recipes inside, a debate that would last the rest of their lives. Annabelle. Thank you. For what? For not looking at me. That first day. Everyone has always seen what they wanted. Money. Power. A face. You saw nothing worth changing your day for. And that made me desperate to become something worth seeing. She took his hand. Intertwined their fingers, brown and golden. I saw you, she said. From the very first day. It scared me so much I pretended I didn't. Because I knew if I looked, really looked, I would never be able to stop. He kissed her hand. Pressed it to his chest, over his heart. I was the coldest man in Seoul. And now? He looked at her. At the woman who melted him. At the maid who brought a monster to his knees and turned him into a man. And now I am yours. Completely. Permanently. Irreversibly yours. She leaned her head on his shoulder. From inside, Adiz shouted, Seo Jin. Come pound this yam. Too skinny. Annabelle laughed. He groaned. She pulled him up and pushed him toward the door. He went, protesting in terrible broken Igbo that her brother had been teaching him, mispronouncing every word so badly the house erupted in laughter before he crossed the threshold. And back in Seoul, 62 floors above Gangnam, fresh sunflowers sat on the windowsill. Golden faces toward the glass, toward the sun that would rise in a few hours. The penthouse was quiet. Sheets clean. Kitchen empty. But the walls held echoes now. Her laughter when he burned the rice. His voice cracking when he first said I love you in a noodle restaurant kitchen. Two people on a floor at 3 in the morning, building something out of financial reports and something much more fragile. Trust. The sunflowers would wilt in a week. Seo Jin would buy more. He would always buy more. Not because they were expensive or rare, but because they reminded him of the morning he realized he was in love, standing in a market at 6 a.m., choosing flowers one stem at a time for a woman who cleaned his house, understanding with a clarity that made him dizzy that he would do this every week for the rest of his life if it meant she would smile. Some love stories begin with a glance across a crowded room. This one began with a mop, a bucket, and a woman who walked past the most desired man in South Korea without a second look. And it ended with that man on his knees. Not in defeat. In gratitude. For the woman who taught him that the strongest walls are not the ones you build around yourself but the ones you are brave enough to tear down. For the maid who became his mirror, reflecting not the man the world saw but the man he could become. For the ordinary woman who did the most extraordinary thing anyone had ever done for him. She loved him honestly. And she made him honest enough to love her back. I am not dessert, she had told him in a laundry room a lifetime ago. She was right. She was not dessert. She was the entire meal. She was the whole feast. And he would spend the rest of his life at her table, grateful, full, and finally, completely home. Now. If this story wrecked you, I need 3 things. First, subscribe right now. The stories on this channel are only getting more intense. Second, drop a comment and tell me what moment broke you. The hospital floor? The noodle restaurant? The sunflower in the jam jar? Her father's words coming back through his mouth at the proposal? Tell me. I read every comment. Third, share this with someone who needs it. Someone tired of being invisible. Someone fighting battles nobody sees. Someone who has been told love like this doesn't happen for people like them. It does. It happens. Sometimes it walks into your life disguised as the most unlikely person in the most unlikely place and turns everything upside down. You just have to be brave enough to let it in. Until next time, keep believing in impossible love. Because sometimes the most impossible love is the only kind that's real.